All right. Good morning, everyone. We have Alex Tigue talking to us this morning about Alabama Pasture to Rail. If you are unable to watch this entire webinar or hang in there this morning, if you go back to the website later on, you will see a live link, or not a live link, you will see a copied link where you can go on and watch the whole thing. These will be recorded. Alex, are you ready to go?
They use it to move Barry and them's cutter.
I'm ready when you guys are.
Okay. Hey, guys, if you are on the call, can you please mute your mic? All right, Alex, we're ready for you.
All right, perfect.
I'm not sure.
Thanks, Courtney. Like Courtney said, my name's Alex Tigue. I'm one of the regional extension agents.
I was supposed to have it sold, and I called the guy again yesterday. And
Mr. Wilson, do you mind to mute your microphone? We would really appreciate it.
Yep.
Can you hear Wilson? Mr. Wilson?
Rustin.
Hey.
Oh, God.
Courtney, you can probably mute him from.
I'm trying.
From where you're at.
15 models, got 700 hours.
I'm trying my best. I don't know how to do it.
That's okay. All right.
It's nice. I got a 120 coming that's got 100 hours on it. Same guy.
Rustin.
Hang on.
I'm trying to do it from here and I can't.
That's okay.
There it goes. It's muted now.
Perfect.
He's muted.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Like I said, my name is Alex Tigue. I'm one of the regional extension agents in Alabama, and I'm also kind of our coordinator for the Alabama Pasture to Rail program. And so today, pretty quickly, we're going to go through and I'll explain the kind of basics of the program, what the program is, and share with you some data that we've collected so far this year on some of the cattle we've sent in 2017 and 18. So what is pasture to rail? For most cattle producers in Alabama, this is your end product, right? A weaned, potentially weaned calf, maybe not a weaned calf, maybe weaned on diesel fuel on the way to the stockyard, but a 450, 5-weight, 6-weight bull calf, steer calf, heifer calf. And for most of us, that's the end of understanding what happens to that calf when it leaves the farm. We load it up and haul it to stockyard, or maybe we can put it on a tractor trailer as part of a truckload lot. But the only feedback we get, whether our cattle are meeting industry expectations, meeting the expectations of the buyer or not, is whether you receive a premium for that calf or you don't. And then whether you get repeat customers later on if you're working in maybe one of our board sales. But we know, regardless, Danny Mac, if you don't mind to mute your microphone, I appreciate that. Well, we do know that regardless of how you sell those calves, market those calves, what you do with them, they're going to end up in a feed yard at some point. They're going to get processed for beef. They're going to hang a carcass that's got carcass merit or carcass characteristics that we want to know about. And a lot of the things that affect how that animal performs in the feeding phase and on the rail are dictated by what's done on the farm, whether it be genetics or health protocols. But because of the way the industry is designed, unless you're retaining ownership on your cattle, you don't get a lot of that feedback. So what pasture to rail is we want to be that centerpiece, the ability to give you a chance to get that data back on your cattle, understand how your cattle are performing once they leave Alabama, and then help you make the changes on your farm to improve their performance. And so this is our retained ownership program for all producers across the state. And I say all producers because it only requires a minimum of 3 head. And we would do fewer than 3, but 3 is a number picked. That way, if one of the calves does die, the remaining 2 will pay the feed bill for that 3rd calf, and we don't have to call you and ask for a check to pay for the feed. But so as long as you've got 3 cows, you can participate in Alabama Pasture to Rail. All the way up to we've had producers in the program that has sent full loads of cattle on their own through the program, wanting to use us as kind of a way to help them understand retained ownership the first time. We do ask that the calves kind of go through a pretty standard preconditioning program. So 60 days weaned. Industry standards, usually talk about 45-day wean on a lot of these VAC programs. But as you talk to a lot of feed yards now, feed yards are asking for these cattle to be more like 60 days weaned. I would encourage a producer, if you were going to do this program, to maybe even go longer than that and put these calves on feed for a little while, but we'll talk about some of that here in a minute. And then a pretty basic standard preconditioning program. 2 rounds of respiratory, 2 rounds of blackleg, with one of the respiratory being a modified live, Pasturella and Mannheimia vaccinations, which are the ones that most folks don't normally do, but are very important. Two of the diseases we probably deal with most in the feed yard would be Mannheimia and IBR. And if we don't have a good modified live respiratory vaccine and that Pasturella vaccine, we're not getting protection against those. That's kind of on you, though. So the cattle belong to the producer that consigns them to the program. And so if they get sick, the costs of that animal getting sick, whether it be reduced performance or added cost in medicine, that rolls back onto that specific calf. If the calf dies, that calf belongs to the producer. And so if you don't do a good job on your preconditioning program, you're hurting yourself, number one, in the program because your calves are not going to perform, but you could also potentially hurt the other cattle on the load because they're bringing in disease that could cause some problems for everybody else. These calves are being fed at High Plains Feed Yard. High Plains is in western Kansas, Montezuma, Kansas, about 20 minutes west of Dodge City, 45-ish minutes southeast of Garden City, Kansas. A lot of reasons we picked that feed yard, mainly because of the previous relationship Dr. Crease Anderson had with the feed yard manager, Ronnie Pruitt. Also, I got a chance to visit that feed yard in 2013, and they kind of stuck out to me as being a pretty progressive yard, doing a lot of pretty neat things. And they've been very willing to work with us on the program. It's 50,000 head one-time capacity feed yard, so it's a relatively large yard. That's feeds a lot of cattle from Alabama. Several different producers from our state feed cattle there. But one of the other kind of nice things about that feed yard is it's located between 4 of the largest packing plants in the country, within about an hour's drive of 4. National Beef in Liberal, National Beef in Dodge City, Cargill in Dodge City, and Tyson in Garden City. And so that's one of the few places in all the United States where you can feed cattle and have competitive bidding on those cattle when it comes time for them to go to processing. And so it gives us a little better chance to get cattle marketed at the end. And at the end of this program, you as the consigner receive all of the data we collect on those calves. So carcass data, which is what everybody gets really excited about, right? Ribeye areas, marbling scores, carcass weights, yield grade, quality grade, back fat thickness, all of those sort of things. Performance data, average daily gain through the time in the yard, live weights at the beginning and end, shrink. But probably to me, the most important thing that you receive back is your individual health data. How many times those calves were pulled for being sick, how much we spent on medicine cost on those animals, and that right there is something we don't get a lot of, and our cattle from the southeast have got a pretty bad reputation for not being very healthy when they go out there, and so I think this is a cool place we can learn some things and hopefully make some improvements. As far as the timeline goes, every time we put together a load, we begin to organize these loads kind of 2 to 4 weeks prior to shipment. I'm working right now to organize loads that are going to ship out in early early September. And it usually takes about that long to get them put together. On shipping day, we will, after we organize the load, I get what I believe on paper and from talking to producers is about 48,000 pounds of cattle put together. We'll pick a central location that is pretty central for all the producers on the load. So if most of the cattle are coming out of North Alabama, we'll find an area in North Alabama to ship the cattle. If they're mostly South Alabama, we'll find somewhere from South Alabama to try and load them out. And then gather those the day before shipment. All the calves are then tagged with an Alabama Pasture rail tag. We assign them a muscle score and a frame score, and then I value them based on what the values are that day in the state of Alabama. Once they leave Alabama, it takes them about 24 hours to get to Kansas. They'll leave Alabama, they go to Oklahoma City, they stop. overnight and are fed, unloaded and fed, and they're loaded back up the next morning and shipped on to Montezuma the next morning. Once they arrive, they're allowed at least 24 hours to rest, sometimes as much as 2 to 3 days, depending on kind of how many cattle they got coming in right then. Then they're processed, sorted into 2 kill groups per truckload, and then sent to their home pen where they'll stay until they're processed. At the end of that time, calves will then be harvested, and then we receive the data back. And that's not a very quick transition, unfortunately. The cattle are harvested, and then we don't get the data back for sometimes as much as 21 days after that. It takes that long just to get the data from the plant, and then also get our kill data, the rest of our data from the feed yard, and get checks cut from the feed yard. As soon as I get that data and I have time, I sit down and work as hard as I can to get that processed and then turned back into individual data for you. There's 4 or 5 different pieces of information that come in from the feed yard and the kill plant that I have to kind of assemble into one piece, and then we get that turned around, checks cut, and sent out to producers just as fast as we can. As far as costs are concerned, it costs $75 a head up front to get the cattle into the program, and then we also charge $4 a head as an administrative fee for Alabama BCIA because they kind of run our money for us. The $75 a head at the front, that pays for shipping, ear tags, health papers, and it also pays a little bit for me to find people to come help work the cattle and get the cattle loaded. Everything else, feed costs, medicine costs, processing costs, is carried by High Plains, and they charge us a small amount of interest for doing that. If not, we'd have to pay a feed bill every 2 weeks, and with sometimes as many as 8 producers on a load, that gets pretty cumbersome. So for about $5 a head, they carry all that cost. Then we sell the calves on a grid-based marketing system where you get premiums and discounts based on carcass quality. Higher levels of marbling and leaner carcasses get premiums, lower levels of marbling and fatter carcasses get discounts. And then those processing costs, or all those feed costs, are taken out of what the cattle bring, and you receive the difference. Price protection is used anytime it's possible where we can protect these calves at a profit. What we've done our first year, 2017 and 18, when we started the program, we used hedging. That's a very complicated way of doing price protection. We could spend another hour and a half on this video conference explaining what a hedge is, and I would be confused, and so would you. So what we've kind of moved to move away from the hedge is a lot simpler way of doing things would be a forward contract. As soon as the cattle arrive in the feed yard or processed and in their home pen, buyers from all the major packers come by and take a look at them, and they tell us how much they would give us in relation to the futures market. We then write a contract, and as soon as we find a place on the futures market that we can protect those calves at least a break even to a profit, we go ahead and contract them as far out in advance as we can. And that way we don't have to worry about what price we're getting at the end. And that's worked pretty well for us so far this year. In 16 and 17, which was the first year we restarted the program, Alabama Pasture Rail existed all the way back into the mid to late 1980s is when it started. But in about 2010, it stopped because of the way the market was and some changes in leadership. But in 2016, we restarted the program. We were really excited that we got 3 loads of cattle shipped in 2016-17, about 208 head from 16 producers across the state, from Lauderdale County to the Wiregrass. We've had some pretty tremendous growth just in 1 year. In 17 and 18, which has been the second year that I've been running the program, we shipped 11 loads from 34 different people across the state, from all 4 corners, Wiregrass to Jackson County, Lauderdale County, and down in the Mobile area, with almost 650 head of cattle. And so my expectation for 2018-19 is to at least see those same kind of numbers again, potentially even having a little bit of growth. We have had a ton of variation, though. In that 2017-18 year, we've sent cattle as light as 460 pounds, all the way up to some calves that weighed 1,100 pounds plus. Now, I'll say this. We do ask that the calves weigh at least 600 pounds. That's for your sake and mine. Cattle just seem to perform a little better when they're a little bigger and they can handle the stress of shipping. But when it comes time to fill a load and you're having a hard time getting a load filled, somebody wants to put some lightweight cattle on, we will take those lighter weight cattle. But I do spend a fair bit of time explaining to that producer the risks of doing so, the potential profit loss of money on those calves, and really try to discourage them from doing that. But we will take them if you insist. And not only we had a lot of weight variation, we had both heifers and steers, but we also had a lot of variation in breed composition, from purebred Angus and Hereford calves to we had some purebred British white calves 2 years ago, to just some calves that have come out of some stockyards. The guys want to try out some stocker calves to see how that works. So a little bit of everything. We fed it all, and we're willing to do more of that. Okay, so we're going to dig into some data from this year, which is very similar to what our data looked like from last year, just to give you an idea of what you might see if you were to feed some cattle, what our cattle are doing right now. And then also, even if you're not interested in feeding cattle in Alabama pasture rail, to me, some of this data I think explains pretty well why we see differences in cattle at our local stockyards or on board sales, why some calves are worth more than others. And so what I've done is gone through our data, compiled all of the data from the first 302 head that we harvested this year. Everything that we sent before January has been harvested, and I've got the data back and compiled that data. And then I've broke it out some different ways. And so this is looking at our data broken out by sex, so comparing the heifers to the steers, which is absolutely nothing groundbreaking. It is everything that I would have expected to see if you'd have kind of told me to pencil this in before we got started. Steers are, averaging about a half pound a day, better average daily gains, which over the same feeding period is going to give you a heavier carcass weight. We're seeing about a 76-pound heavier carcass on those calves. Again, we also would expect the steers to be a little bit heavier muscled and a little bit have a little less fat on their carcass. And that's exactly what our carcass data showed. The steers had greater than a 1 square inch larger ribeye area, but then had about a half a yield grade score better, meaning that their carcass was a good bit leaner than their heifer counterparts. But because of that, the heifers then also had a little bit higher marbling score. So all the things we kind of would have expected to see. We do see some differences in profit. The heifers tended to be a little bit more profitable than the steers, but I think there's some explanation for that. Number one, the heifers were valued lower than the steers. So heifers are just not worth as much as the steers are. And when we value these cattle on the front end of the program to get a baseline value, that's reflective when you start looking at the stockyard prices. But I actually think those two numbers, the profit numbers, would be virtually identical if we could account for feed intake. So we don't have any way in this program to gather individual feed intake data. The cattle are fed in 60 or 80 head pens together. And so all we have is the feed intake for the entire pen. So each calf gets their feed cost based on their individual gain multiplied by the average feed efficiency of the pen. So this assumes that heifers and steers are eating the same amount of feed to produce the same amount of gain. Steers actually tend to be a little bit more efficient. So I think if we could actually go in there and see what the difference was between the heifers and steers on feed efficiency, those two profit numbers would be virtually identical. And so I've always been one that thinks that heifers tend to be a little undervalued at the stockyard. When you go to the stockyard and they're 20 cents back of their steer counterparts, that seems a little eye-popping at first. But our data kind of explains that, there's a reason they're cheaper. It's because they're not worth as much when we get them to the end of the program. And because they don't gain as well, their carcasses are a little lighter, their feed efficiency is not quite as good, we can't pay quite as much for them here in Alabama and expect to make the same kind of money when they get out to western Kansas. This slide kind of starts to look at how these cattle perform based on how big they were when they left Alabama. And so that ship weight on the left is their shipping weight when they left our state. So 500 to 599 pounds would be all the steers and heifers that weighed between 500 and 599 pounds, obviously. And I think this is really important. This is something that the feed yard manager, the feed yard owner, the feed yard veterinarian and I talk about a lot. Is where is kind of the right weight to be shipping these cattle out of our state. And you can see there are some drastic differences in all of these categories, almost all these categories, based on how big they are when they leave Alabama. So where I kind of want to hone in on is really on performance. Basically, the bigger the cattle are when they leave Alabama, the bigger they're going to be when they harvest. And that data was exactly the same last year on those 200 head of cattle as it is on these 300 head of cattle. And I've got a feeling when I get the data on the remaining 300 head I've got in the feed yard, it's going to look pretty similar to this as well. The calves just get larger because they go out there bigger. The reason for that being is when they get to the feed yard, it really doesn't matter what size those calves are. They immediately go on a finish ration. They give them 30 days to kind of warm up, and they work them up to that high concentrate, high corn silage ration. And then as soon as they can get them on that ration, they're trying to get them to gain weight as fast as they can. By doing that, if the calves have not grown a skeleton that can handle getting pretty large, they're just going to sit there and pack on fat and muscle onto the frame they've got. They don't have time to put a lot of additional frame on. And so these bigger calves down here at the bottom, the 900 pounders, they're already yearlings, 14, 15 months old even when they leave Alabama. They've got the frame of almost a mature animal. So when they get out there and they start eating, they're going to pack on the muscle and fat to fit that frame versus that 500-pound calf. Obviously, his frame's pretty small, and he just doesn't have, even if he's on feed for, say, 200 days, that doesn't give him the time it takes to put on the frame to get up to that 1,500-pound finish weight. Interestingly, though, to me, and this, again, is the exact same data we saw from 2 years ago, or at least the same trend, is those bigger cattle gain faster as well. And I think we can attribute that to a couple of things. One, that rumen is a little bit more well-developed on these older animals, so they're able to handle that transitional diet a little better. That rumen is bigger, and they can physically pack away more pounds of feed, and so we're jamming more feed through that system, which in turn is going to give us more gains. But also, their immune system is a little bit better, and they're a little less naive as they get a little older to some of this disease pressure. And so when they do go to the feed yard, those older, bigger animals tend to handle the shipping stress a lot better, because that shipping date when they leave Alabama, travel 12 hours, go to Oklahoma, get unloaded, get fed, loaded back up, travel another 7 hours, and then end up in the feed yard, that's a stressful 24-hour period. And those older animals just seem to handle that stress a little better. So they go to gaining a little quicker and really don't ever slow down. What we did see, though, is kind of look at our carcass side of the equation. There are not really any major differences in marbling score. A 400 on that marbling score number, a 400 would be low choice. A 300 series would have been select. Mid 400s would be, or 500 would be the beginning of mid choice. 600 would be high choice, and 700 would be prime, to give you kind of an idea what the scale is there. So the differences you're seeing are very nominal, from 470 to 530 in that range. That's less than one marbling score, and I actually think on that small number of animals, there's more variation within those groups than there is between groups. So I wouldn't say there's any difference in marbling score. We do see the calves that are a little larger tend to have a larger ribeye area, especially as we get up over 800 pounds. Those calves tend to have a little bit bigger muscle, a little more muscling. And then out there on the side would be the average number of treatments a calf receives. And kind of going back to that idea of these older animals can handle the stress a little better. Those 7, 8, and 9 weight calves on average get treated a little less than those 6 and 5 weights do. So getting those calves out there a little bigger, seems to work better for the animals and for us as well. The other thing I want to look at, because I think it's incredibly important and we don't talk about it enough, is health. And I just want to illustrate why health is so important to us by looking at what our 302 head did so far this year. So what this is broken down by is the number of times those animals were treated. So you can see on the left, far left-hand side, that would be the number of treats. So 0 would be the animals were processed into the feed yard. They went to their home pen. They never got sick. They never got pulled out of the pen. They never got treated for any kind of disease. Okay. 1 would mean they got pulled one time. a pen writer saw them, said, hey, that calf looks sick, we need to treat it. And it gets pulled out of the pen and treated almost always for respiratory disease. 2 times is an animal that was sick enough that it got pulled twice, and obviously 3 times the animal was pulled 3 times. In these numbers are included the animals that died. And so all these averages also include some dead animals that are in there. So that's one of the reasons why you see the profit numbers drop pretty heavily on those 2s and 3s, because there were some deads in there as well. But what we see is that 85% of the animals that we shipped out there the first part of this year never got sick. They never got treated. And that's a great number, especially considering these are commingled loads. You know, if these were cattle off of one farm that had been together their whole lives, and we didn't introduce any outside genetics, any outside animals, any outside disease, we could expect that number to be a little higher, you know, closer to 90% or maybe even over 90 on some really good cattle. But we understand these are commingled cattle. I'm extremely happy with 85% never being treated. We did have 12% that were treated once, obviously almost 2.5 or over 2.5% treated twice. And then only 1 animal got treated 3 times, fortunately. But of those animals that were treated twice, 2 of those ended up dying. So on those animals that got sick, pretty sick like that, we did end up seeing some higher death loss. We were running 1% death loss on this group, so 3 total deads. The other dead was in the 0 group, and it was a bloat. But what we can look at are a lot of different things on this slide. One, obviously, as the animals get sick, there's some cost involved with that sickness. And so about every time they get pulled out of the pen and treated, you're talking about $30. Okay, none of the drugs that we're using to treat respiratory disease in the feed yard are cheap. We're not using LA-200. Okay, they're using Draxxin, Nuflor, Resflor, Baytril, all of the pretty powerful high-dollar drugs that we can use, because they don't have time for these cattle to get sick and meander around for 3 or 4 weeks and try and get better. We need them to get better today, because every day they're sick, they're losing weight. And that's very reflective in their finished weights, average daily gains, and hot carcass weights, right? So just by getting sick one time, animal got sick once, we had almost 80 pounds less finished weight at the end of the program. And so if you were selling these cattle on a live weight basis and you were getting, say, $1.20 a pound, that's over $100 right there that we lost just in missed opportunity on those animals. That doesn't include the feed efficiency loss, the loss of the added drug cost, anything else. That's just in pure loss of pounds at the end by getting treated once. You treat them twice, it's almost 200 pounds in loss at the end. So keeping these animals healthy is extremely important. If you take the numbers we have out there for profit at the end, and we assume that none of those animals got sick, on 300 head, we lost about $7,000 in missed opportunity by not having all those animals stay healthy all the way through. Now, there's never going to be a time when every animal stays healthy, but we need to try and minimize these numbers best we can. Average daily gains reflect that. You know, we lose a little bit of average daily gains if they get treated once. Nothing real terrible, but some. But getting treated a second time, those animals perform very poorly. Over 1 pound less gain every day through the feeding period. And then where we get paid is on carcass weight. Those calves that get treated twice, 60 pounds of lost carcass weight at $2 a pound, we're talking $120 in lost opportunity there. That's just not going to work. We don't see a lot of difference in marbling score. I attribute that mostly to the fact that there were just small numbers. If we were to take this out, to several thousand head of cattle, you might see some differences in marbling scores. We did see some difference in ribeye area, and that is, again, very similar to what we saw last year. We don't see any differences on the animals that were treated once, but we do see differences on the animals that are treated twice. Again, that's exactly what we saw last time. And so you can see there at the end, if the animals got treated, if they didn't get treated, we made about $250 a head this past year so far. Treated one time, we dropped that down to $71. It does include 1 dead calf in there, and that's why that number is a little lower than it should be, or than it probably would be. If we took the dead out, that number is probably more like $150. That's still $100 in lost profit right there. Treated twice, we're losing money on those calves. So health is incredibly important, absolutely incredibly important. And it's one of the reasons why doing things in Alabama to try and keep those calves or prepare those calves to go to the feed yard is so important. Doing your vaccinations, weaning those calves, and getting those calves adjusted to eating out of a feed bunk. Vaccinating them correctly on time with the right vaccines. Can't tell you how many times I've heard at stockyards or heard from producers that, well, I'm not going to vaccinate them that second time. They're just going to get it when they get to the feed yard. Yes, they are going to get revaccinated when they get to the feed yard because the feed yard doesn't trust that you've done it like you should, but also just as cheap insurance. But that would be like sending your kids to kindergarten for the first time and waiting to give them their vaccines until they get to kindergarten and they've been there for about 3 hours. Okay, it just doesn't work. So vaccinating them before they're getting shipped and working with your local veterinarians to put together the best herd health program you can is direly important. Okay, as we kind of compare our calves to national averages, this is the all the data that came in from the 2016 National Beef Quality Audit. So every 4 years, the checkoff pays for researchers to go into harvest plants and take data on all these cattle and look for problems, but they also collect the data and give us some nice averages. And so what we've seen over the last 15 years is we're increased our marbling scores a little bit. Our yield grade is about the same. You know, we've increased carcass weights by about 100 pounds, and we've also increased our ribeye areas by almost an inch over the last since 1991. But we kind of look at our cattle for 2018, and we can be pretty excited about how they've done. Their marbling chart there is a little different. You can see their scale down at the bottom, with select being 600 and choice being where the choice break being at 700. Our calves were a full marbling score better on average than what we saw in 2016 in the National Beef Quality Audit, which was about 9,000 head of cattle, by the way, on National Beef Quality Audit data. We're right on the money, real close to right on the money for ribeye, for back fat thickness and hot carcass weight, but we're almost a full inch larger on our ribeye areas as well. Because of that number, we see that our USDA yield grades are about a half a score better than average. So, you know, our cattle can get it done. They're doing a really good job. I will say our data may be a little skewed because we have one producer that has sent a lot of cattle that is a purebred Angus producer whose cattle do really, really well on the rail. But even our data from last year that didn't have quite as much of their cattle in there was pretty similar to this. You know, our cattle are stacking up pretty close to what industry averages are. The other thing that's pretty interesting to look at over time is how the percentage choice and grader has changed. Back in the early 90s, you know, if we could get 50% choice or 55% choice out of a group of cattle, we were pretty excited. Versus now, if you walk into a Cargill plant in western Kansas or a national plant in western Kansas right now, they're going to be running every day, running 70 to 73% choice or better cattle through the plant. And also, the nice thing about that is our cattle, every kill group that we've sent in the last 2 years, except 2, has beat the plant average on the day for percentage choice or better. We're every time been better than 70%, except those 2, and both of those were greater than 65% choice. So our cattle have got the genetics to marble and have done pretty well. Where are we going for this year? All 5 of our loads that we sent before Christmas have been harvested, and producers have been paid for those. That's about 302 head. That's the data that you've been looking at for the last few minutes. Okay. Actually, 4 of the 11 spring groups, so we sent an additional 11, excuse me, let's see, what is that? 6 truckloads of cattle after the first of the year through June that broke out into 11 harvest groups. 4 of those groups have been harvested. 2 more of the groups are being harvested next week. And then we've got a lot that won't go until October, November, and December, some younger cattle. That's about 354 head there, roundabout. So, but where we're planning on going for 2018 and 2019. So our first loads of cattle, we're going to try and start shipping in September. I'm working on getting those organized right now. So if you're interested, if there's anybody on the webinar that's interested in sending some cattle early this fall, give me a call. We've currently got about a half a load put together to go the first week of September, and I'm trying to find about 20 to 25 more head to go then. And then we'll start shipping calves as soon as I can get them. We'll have loads go out in October and November for sure. I've already kind of talked to some producers about that. Probably November, we may have as many as 3 loads go in that month alone. We're potentially looking at adding some BVD-PI testing for all the calves and not requiring that prior to, but doing it while we're receiving the cattle. I'm working with a veterinarian friend of mine that's found a BVD PI test that we can do chute side that gives us real-time results 20 minutes after we take the test. The challenge I'm running into with doing BVD PI testing on all the calves is labor. It pretty well takes an additional person just to do that. And so if I can find a person to help me run around and work all these cattle and do that, in addition to the people I've already got helping me, we're going to start working that in at really at no additional cost. It only ends up costing about $2 a head, and we'll find a way to eat that cost. But one thing we are going to change from a cost perspective is add an additional $5 shipping adjustment for the heavy cattle, so the cattle that go over 850 pounds when we ship them. I ran into some issues this past year where we shipped some 1,000-pound calves, and every time a calf gets larger, that's one fewer calf that can get on the truck. So $75 a head works really good to make our shipping cost all work out when I can get about 60 or 65 head on the truck. I sent some loads with as few as 53 head on the truck this year, and we broke even on those loads, but just barely. And if trucking goes up any, if trucking were $3.80 a loaded mile instead of $3.60 a loaded mile, we would have had to find additional funds to get those cattle shipped. So we're going to go $5 additional over for those heavy cattle, and what that'll be is it's nothing on the front end. I'll take it out on the back end after the cattle are harvested. It'll just be a deduction off of your check at the end. And that's not enough to affect profitability, but it is enough to help us get these cattle shipped and make sure we don't lose any money. And then we've also included a junior program. And so if you're interested or you've got any kids or know people that have kids that might be interested in participating in junior pasture to rail, Michael Agar and myself are kind of putting that together. Michael at the Alabama Cattlemen Association, and the Cattlemen Association is handling registration. Basically, it's the exact same as pasture to rail. With the entry fee is a little different, but the kids can get their money refunded if it's over at the end. But basically, we're going to do some educational programs for the kids throughout the year, 5 to 6 of those, starting this fall and running through the spring. Registration for that's going to be ending here pretty quick. So if you know anybody that's interested in having their kids in the junior program, go to the ACA website and you can find that information and go ahead and get registered here pretty quick. All right. So with that, if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to ask. This is my cell phone and email address. You are welcome to give me a call or shoot me an email if you've got questions about the Pasture to Rail program. You can also find our rules and regulations as well as the forms that it takes to send cattle at our Beef Systems website under the Alabama Pasture to Rail tab. You can search Google for Alabama Pasture to Rail extension, and it should be one of the first things to pop up. You can go there for information, like I said, or you can contact me and I'll be glad to send that directly to you or answer any questions you got. So that, anybody got any questions? That's on the webinar? No? Maybe?
Well, thank
All right.
anyone.
Well, we appreciate you getting online today and watching. I see, seemed like we had pretty good participation this time. If you've got any questions, like I said, feel free to ask them right now. If not, you can call me, text me, email me, whatever, and I'll be glad to help you out.
And guys, while I have you, be sure to tune in September 12th for Dr. Rishi Prasad for the 4 R's in animal waste and nutrient management. Also, there's an event coming up September 1st that will be hosted at Gulfport, Mississippi at the Harrison Field Fairgrounds. It'll be it's sponsored by Cinch. It's a ranch cattle sorting clinic. Clay Cavender and I will be putting it on. If you want to contact me about information about this clinic, it's for youth and adults. Email me at cem0022@auburn.edu.
And one other plug real quick, because I know it's coming up for all of us, but it's really quickly. All of the REAs around the state are put together our Beef Systems 360 working groups. If you're interested in that program, there's been a pile of advertisements. You can find that stuff on our Beef Systems website. But those are going to be some really cool discussion groups, kind of a new model we're trying out for doing extension work. I think that'd be really great. And if you're interested in something like that, again, contact me if you're going to be in East Alabama, or just find Dr. Kim Molnix or your local animal science REA, and they can point you in the right direction for that program.
All right. I guess we're good to go. Thanks,
Great.
Alex.
Thanks, guys.